And there we go. Right, so welcome to episode 4 of the Rugby Codebreakers. A couple of days late. We apologise for that, but life happens.
My bad. Sorry.
So no worries. It just gave us more to talk about as we went past another weekend. So without further ado, let me introduce the posh boy rah-rah fancying Lawrence, my co-host.
And the chef de partie over there, our resident Northern Oik, Martin himself.
Thank you very much. Northern Oik and proud. So, yeah, I think we've got a lot to cover since our last episode, and I think the first thing that we really want to have a look at is the end of the autumn international series in the Northern Hemisphere in rugby union. And I think we have to go first, really, to Wales and their hilarious, unexpected defeat at home to Georgia.
Yeah, putting the comedy into comedy of errors, really. Yeah, but I don't think we should take too much away from Georgia, who, from everything I saw, were actually good value for their win.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to make, because one of the things I was thinking is we often talk about how we want to see the game grow and new countries join in and build up and everything. And when it happens and they start to ruffle a few feathers and beat some established teams, the first thing that everybody says is, "Oh my God, what's happened to Wales?" Instead of, "Woohoo, go Georgia. They're doing well. They're doing what we want."
Yeah. But it's a very good time for Italy to have beaten the Australians as well, with that happening to Wales.
Yeah, definitely.
In a way, Georgia's success against Wales will just add to the clamour of some sort of relegation and promotion to the Six Nations proper.
Yeah. And if we were to have that, you'd have to say at the moment Wales would be favourites for the drop.
Yeah.
Having lost to Italy and Georgia.
Yeah, and how they blew the lead against Australia, I'll never quite be sure either. 21 points to the good?
Yeah, 34 points to 13 up in the second half. So, and that was really, I'm not sure, to be fair, that winning that match would have saved Wayne Pivac's job. It might have done, but it was a chance. A home win against Australia would have meant something. To lose your discipline like that with losing players to the sin bin and throw away a 21-point lead on your home ground in less than half a match it just said it all, didn't it? We wondered, had Wayne Pivac lost the dressing room? And you think at that stage, are your players really playing for you if they can't hold a 21-point lead?
I noticed that Warren Gatland was there working for Amazon and did not categorically deny any contact from the Welsh Rugby Union beforehand. But not long afterwards, he'd taken the brave decision to return.
Yeah, it's the second coming, isn't it? And I'm not sure I would take that job in Warren Gatland's place. We were talking earlier, trying to work out how successful he's been, and what was it you said? 2 World Cup semi-finals and 3 Grand Slams. Yeah, a tremendous track record as Wales coach, and I think it just sets expectation very high when you're coming back in. And let's face it, wasn't that long ago.
In some ways, the core of his team is still there, but much older now. He's still got the likes of Alan Wynne-Jones in there at captain.
Yeah.
And there's some issues with the likes of Lee Halfpenny, who was twice selected for the Welsh in this autumn series and twice broke down in the warm-up.
Yeah, that's worrying. And it does look like there are a lot of people saying that the system is broken in Wales at the moment, and it does look like they're struggling to replace players as they get older. Alan Wynne-Jones has been perhaps the greatest Welsh player of all. He's got to be got to be the greatest Welsh forward of all time and top 5 in anybody's Welsh players list, I would guess. But again, you think he's not quite the force he was now.
Yeah. One of the things that Gatlin might be able to sort out if he's taking a top-down approach to the Welsh Rugby Union is the habit they've got. He was talking about on the Amazon coverage of why are they paying for journeymen to come into the Welsh game rather than paying for elite players to come and play in Wales. So they're paying for people who have been 1-2 caps at best for nations in the Southern Hemisphere to come in, and they're taking spots that may be taken by Welsh players to develop and not offering elite skills themselves to help the Welsh players grow.
So maybe fewer imports, but of higher quality, simultaneously leaves more places for Welsh players and also puts a few more bums on seats in the fans. If you're bringing over a high quality of import, people will turn out to see them. I'm
finding the league interesting that they're playing. I was taking an interest in Welsh rugby and to be fair, Scottish club rugby for the first time in ages. And I saw that they're playing in a league with South African, French, Italian clubs as well. But the likes of the Chargers, Stormers, Bulls, and Zebre from Italy and Benetton Treviso.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
The 2 Italian sides not rock bottom either.
Definitely. It's a good thing, isn't it? Because some of those countries in the last few years, the Welsh club system and the Scottish club system, you think, are they sustainable running a league of their own? And you think that sort of mixed league maybe brings a bit more interest to everything, but also means you don't have to sustain quite as many clubs when you've maybe just not got the fan base to support it. I mean, Scotland, we have to bear in mind, is a country of 5 million people, and football is far and away the most popular sport among that country. So there's just only so many people you can get through the gates, through the turnstiles.
So I think it makes sense for them to concentrate in the 2 Glasgow and Edinburgh in the sides there.
Yeah.
So it really focuses the Scottish talent and allows them to play. And then you got people like Hoggy and Finn Russell who go off and play abroad. So I think once your players have reached an elite status, then you can let them go. It'd be nice to keep them in country.
Yeah.
At the same time, it builds cohesion.
It does, and I think the fact that some of them, like Finn Russell, go to France, everything is not a bad thing at all. It means that he plays alongside other elite players in a different competition, then brings that back to his national side. It also gives young Scottish players something to aim at. They can look at it and think, you know what, this is a game where I can travel, see the world, make money. Do all the things that if you're a 16-year-old player and you could, let's face it, most athletic young kids tend to be when they're at school, they're good at all sports for the most part. So football again tends to hoover up the most athletically gifted because every kid growing up is seeing football on the TV all the time. They're seeing footballers make enormous sums of money, and you think, yeah, that'll do for me. So every other sport, not just rugby union, but rugby league, cricket, all of them, to an extent, have to content themselves with those athletically gifted players who are brought up in rugby or cricket households, or the ones who are not quite good enough at football to make it there, who go elsewhere. So if you have poster child for success, that again can just persuade people, no, actually, this is a worthwhile path to follow.
Otherwise, you end up with the West Indian cricket cycle, where the part of the decline of West Indies cricket has been blamed on the increase in popularity in the West Indies of basketball, meaning that the young athletically gifted players start looking at basketball and to some extent athletics as a means to fame and fortune rather than the cricket, because there was not all that much money in cricket before the T20 revolution.
Yeah, yeah. Sport is, let's face it, the great working class escape. For if you're a kid growing up without much money, who has athletic ability, sport offers a pathway to wealth for a few. Only for a few, we know that, but still, it's something to go for. When a sport can't offer you that, that will put some people off it, even if they love playing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we've digressed a little, but they're basically saying nothing necessarily wrong with letting a few of your players leave the country of their birth to ply their trade elsewhere in a more high-profile league.
Yeah. So we can then segue back from the change of management in Wales to the performance of England in their autumn internationals and the potential exit for Eddie Jones.
Yeah, and I think Eddie Jones's England over the whole course of his run as coach that's had some incredible highs. There's no doubt of that. Has always been patchy, inconsistent. Sometimes they get it together and they look absolutely brilliant and they'll put a good run of results together. The Grand Slam a couple of years ago, some great results on tour. Run to the World Cup final. But it never seems to be sustained. The same players can go from looking like absolute world beaters for Eddie Jones to 3 or 4 months later to thinking, well, he's got that all wrong. Why are they even in the squad?
They don't have the consistency of the Woodward era. They don't have the win at all costs mentality. And they're also failing to entertain. So
yes.
You either want absolute success or fantastic rugby out of them.
Yeah.
And I don't think you get neither.
No, exactly. There is talent in that squad. There's no doubt about that. The big question is, will the RFU at this stage, they say they'll be looking and thinking, we're only a couple of months out from the Six Nations. It's less than a year to a World Cup. Is there any mileage in changing the man at the helm now? Because Eddie's already turned it around a couple of times before. And he would say he's building to the World Cup and maybe they're in a slump at the moment, but by this time next year, they could be on top of the world.
The thing that I think will save him is who do they get to replace him?
I've seen a lot of rumours about Andy Farrell, about Shaun Edwards. Both of them have just signed new contracts with the countries they're currently working with, so that they would look like complete non-starters.
Shaun Edwards might want to step up to the main chair.
Yeah.
But I don't see you getting Farrell away from the Irish with the way they're playing at the moment.
No, I suspect Shaun Edwards might well go for the England job after the next World Cup. To take it at the start of a World Cup cycle, I think might be more appealing to him than coming in at the moment.
I suspect Andy Farrell would see a step down in moving from Ireland to England at the moment.
Yeah, he's been arguing with some justification and evidence that he's already coaching the best side in the world.
They have hit the number 1 rating.
Yeah.
And they just beat New Zealand in New Zealand for the first time ever.
Yeah. So, and again, a year out from the World Cup, you wouldn't want to walk away from that. You'd be saying, I've currently got a genuine chance to do something absolutely groundbreaking and legendary.
At the risk of this coming back to bite me, Eddie Jones in charge of England gets to 3rd place in the Six Nations and a World Cup semi-final.
Yeah, could well be. Yeah. Well, if we really want to look at some rumours, put 2 and 2 together and make 5, or possibly even 6. There was a combination of rumours that some eagle-eyed observers had noticed recently. Rumour number 1, Wigan Rugby League recently said that they would be making an announcement soon that would be huge for Wigan and huge for Rugby League. That was about 2 weeks ago now, I think, and it's all gone quiet. And nobody knows what their announcement is going to be. There's nothing coming out of the club. Everyone's speculating, is it a big signing? Who knows? At the same time, speculation over Eddie Jones's future, and a rumour coming out that Eddie Jones might be considering a move to rugby league. So
I'm not sure if that's it's like this. I was about to make the flippant suggestion that they were switching to rugby union, but I think that may be about as possibly about as likely. I'm not sure.
yeah, and that would be huge for rugby league in the sense of absolutely devastating for rugby league, wouldn't it? If one of your 2 or 3 biggest clubs suddenly says, "Yeah, we're going, bye." uh, yeah, and to be fair, I could see Eddie Jones moving to rugby league at some point because he obviously has an affinity for the game. He speaks very highly of the NRL, but if he ever were to be going to rugby league, he'd be going to Australia. I think I don't see him.
Think so. I don't know whether he'd be a massive punt for someone as a coach, though. Surely.
You'd think so. It'd be a huge thing to say. Right, this guy's obviously a very successful coach, but in a different sport.
It would be up there with Sir Clive Woodward as a performance coach for Southampton FC.
Yeah, yeah. And you'd have to say, maybe a club in Australia says we'll bring Eddie Jones in for his man management and motivation, the transferable aspects of coaching, and we just put a good team of specialist coaches with him.
The sort of a head coach role rather than a almost management manager rather than coach.
Yeah, and that might work. In fairness, though, as I said, I don't think Eddie Jones actually has any intention of leaving. If he leaves the England job, it'll be because he's moved on, not because he wants to go somewhere else at this stage. Yeah. I think he'll want to see out that World Cup at least.
And yeah, he would want to, I think, consider his position at that time.
Yeah,
and I think his consideration will be influenced by this period of uncertainty. If he feels that they were thinking of sacking him, he might feel that was time to move on anyway.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But of course, we've got a Six Nations to come. And it's possible that they'll say, we'll give him the Six Nations and see how that goes. And you never know with Eddie Jones in England. 2 months' time, Six Nations could be getting off, and a few weeks later, they could have stormed to a Grand Slam victory.
Yeah, Grand Slam, and it'll be what was all the fuss about, and a wooden spoon means he's gone.
Yeah, exactly. So
actually, I would say anything less than third would put him in trouble.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I think they're going to want to be contenders for the championship, if not winning it. And in a way, he might think that's a little bit harsh because he might be thinking, will it really matter if we end up coming fourth in the Six Nations, for example, but win the World Cup? But the point is, if you come fourth in the Six Nations, you might not get the chance to win the World Cup.
Is the Calcutta Cup at Twickenham this year or Murrayfield?
You know what? I don't actually remember.
You know that if you were to lose the Calcutta Cup match again at Twickenham, that would be a time that would actually make the English sit up and notice, because I think the English do tend to think of the Scottish fixation on the Calcutta Cup as, oh, that's sweet. Oh, they if the Scottish can lose every other match and win the Calcutta Cup and go, good season.
Yeah.
But the English don't attach the same importance to it. However, if the English lose or fail to win a fourth consecutive Calcutta Cup, then they'll start thinking dark thoughts, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a bit like the way the Australian Rugby League team and the New Zealanders used to regard the Anzac Day test when they used to have that. New Zealand were up for it every year with, yes, this rivalry, and the Aussies were kind of like, oh, if we lose, it's nice for them, isn't it? Because it means a lot to them. Yeah. You often get that, I suppose, when you've just got a small country next to with a rivalry with a much bigger one in terms of resources and everything. The fact is, England have, way more people and way more money to spend on sports. Given that, Scotland will probably say over their history that they've done well to have to have knocked the English over as often as they have.
Definitely.
But, so moving on, but staying on the international front for a moment, we were talking last time about the Rugby League World Cup and the usual post-Rugby League World Cup of how does Rugby League build on this momentum and how will they in fact fail to do so? And the first thing that everybody wanted was fixtures. Everyone was like, when can we see these teams play again? Who will they be up against? And when will it happen? And that's sort of a little progress on that front from this World Cup. We've already started qualifiers for the 2025 World Cup, and we just had around a South American qualification group between Brazil, Colombia, and Chile. So internationals were taking place there last week. Brazil won that series, so they move on now to the North America qualifying group with USA, Canada, and Jamaica. And whoever wins that little tournament will end up getting their place in 2025 World Cup. But it's the European clubs who also have who always struggle to find matches. What the International Federation have announced at the end of the coming season, the 2023 season, will be the biggest ever European Championship in Rugby League history. Which is going to feature 8 teams: England Knights, so effectively England's second team, France, who've already qualified for the next World Cup as holders, and then 6 more teams: Scotland, Ireland, Wales, Greece, Italy, and Serbia.
I'd be tempted to slide Lebanon in there in the same way that Israel gets to play in UEFA.
Yes, well, it wouldn't be a bad idea at all. Lebanon have actually already qualified for the next World Cup by reaching the knockout stages of this one.
Given the games,
but they do need games. Exactly. The word is that probably the top 2 sides of this championship, not counting France and England Knights, will qualify automatically for the World Cup. The next 2 will play the winners of a second-tier competition that will feature Germany, Czech Republic, and a couple of other countries for 2 more spots in the World Cup. So that's going to be interesting because I think it's going to be very hard for some of the home nations necessarily to get through at this point. This last World Cup, we had all of the home nations participating. I don't see that happening in the next World Cup. I think Ireland, Scotland, Wales, at least one of them is not going to get through. But maybe Serbia
is
will
the
find
pecking
their
order
way.
now between Ireland and Scotland? Because it used to be very much so, I believe, Wales, Ireland, Scotland, with Ireland and Wales actually fairly close. I think the Irish have dropped off a bit.
Yeah, I think Wales have dropped off drastically as well, and I don't think there's much now to choose between Wales, Ireland, and Scotland in rugby league. I think all of those teams have been too reliant on Australian players with heritage in the last few years. Wales made a conscious decision not to go that route in this World Cup, and they lost all their games, but they won't mind too much. They'll say, you know what, we went the homegrown route, and that will stand us in good stead for future tournaments if we can concentrate on developing our own players. I think that's probably wise because at some point we've got to assume that that stream of Australians with a grandparent is going to dry up because they're only going to be Australians with a great grandparent soon. And then what do you do? So I don't know. I think Scotland really didn't do much in this World Cup. In the previous World Cup, they'd done really well. And of course, not long before that, they'd had their biggest moment when they played in the Four Nations and drew with New Zealand. But I think that in terms of growth for rugby league, Serbia and Greece are much better bets than the other home nations here because I think if you're trying to sell rugby league in Wales, Scotland, and Ireland, you've had a long time to do it, and it's not really.
Wales has had, I think, more of a culture than either Ireland or Scotland in that regard.
Yeah, I think so. I think back to the Welsh team of 1995 and 2000, their runs to the semi-finals of the World Cups and so on. But a lot of that was dependent on rugby union imports that dried up again when rugby union went professional, and most of them just headed home. What all of those countries have failed to do is, whenever they've had a bit of success, to build on it with a pathway of players following on. Whereas I look at Serbia, who narrowly missed out on qualification last time, and think, yeah, rugby league isn't big in Serbia, but all the Serbian players are homegrown and play in a domestic competition, and that's mostly true for Greece as well. And I feel like there's more of a foundation to build on for those countries. I don't want to. If anyone from Scotland Rugby League or Ireland Rugby League is watching, I don't want them to feel like I'm rubbishing it. I know that there's a lot of people working hard to get that kind of development in those countries, but I just feel like they have a bit of an uphill struggle because there's so much competition.
Yeah, they're going to face, for a small country, they're going to face so much competition from both football, as discussed earlier, and union, just having such the bigger tradition and visibility.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking about, players, young players looking up at role models and everything. You'd think, oh well, I could play football, or if I can't do that, I could play in front of a packed house at Murrayfield in the Six Nations, or I could play in front of 800 people playing rugby league. You have to really love the game.
Yeah,
to want to go through, and there's just not enough people. I hope I'm wrong and it becomes a flourishing success.
Yes.
But then again, as I say, for Serbia, I look at them and think, yeah, they could make it. They've been improving all the time, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see them in the next World Cup. And then we shall see. But as I say, that's the good news from Rugby League's perspective internationally, is we have a big tournament lined up and a clear pathway to the World Cup for the teams involved. What we don't know is who any of the big teams are going to play.
So the question I have then is, that's Rugby League doing things well. How are they managing to shoot themselves in the foot? There's generally something they do to screw it up. What are they looking at this time?
And I think that what leaps to mind is almost an attempt to sabotage international rugby league, it seems, where there are people calling in Australia for a change to the eligibility rules. The biggest games in Australian rugby league are State of Origin series, the 3-match series every season between Queensland and New South Wales. It's probably not just the biggest games in Australian rugby league, it's the biggest sporting event in Australia. It's absolutely huge, and that's what every player grows up wanting to be in as a result. And there are people basically saying that the players of the Pacific Islands, Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, all of these people need to choose play Origin or play for your country, but you can't do both. We had this rule a few years ago where in order to play Origin, you had to put your hand up to play for Australia. If you qualified for Australia, you had to say, no, that's who I'm playing for. And that, of course, meant that players couldn't then represent the country of their heritage or in some cases their birth. We got rid of that rule, and we've seen it paid huge dividends in the international game. We saw Samoa get to the World Cup final. We've seen Tonga beat Australia, beat Great Britain, beat New Zealand. We've seen Fiji knock New Zealand out of the World Cup in 2017. Just as the International Rugby League is getting genuinely competitive and we're getting a number of teams who can beat the best. Make no mistake, Australia is still far and away the front runners. But beyond them, there's now a chasing pack instead of one from England or New Zealand, which is what we had for years. Why some people would want to then say, no, actually, let's cut the legs off from that, and force these players to, as I say, to choose between origin and playing for their country is absolutely baffling to me. I'm not sure there's enough support for it. I'm hoping that common sense will prevail and people will say, you know what does it matter?
Rugby league has been crying out for years and years for a thriving international scene where internationals matter, where there's pride in the jersey, and then they go and do something like this where they seem to be actively trying to sabotage it.
Yeah,
As I think we were talking about before we started recording. It kind of feels like the Australians kind of want to make sure they keep winning.
Yeah.
But
And if that's the case, it's sad. Yeah. Especially since, as I say, they're still clearly far and away the best team on the planet. And B, what's the point of being the biggest fish in a very small pond all the time? Surely you'd rather be in a big pond.
Surely there's also some professional pride in wanting to stretch themselves against quality opposition.
Absolutely. What I'd like to
even WWE worked out that squash matches aren't always fun.
Yeah, indeed. I would like to see at the end of this coming season a tournament involving a bunch of those nations. A tournament featuring, say, the 8 World Cups quarterfinalists would be great, wouldn't it? We could have England, Papua New Guinea, Lebanon, Australia, New Zealand, Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji. Just have those, I don't know, put them in 2 groups of 4 and have the winners play each other in a final or something. You'd get a whole bunch of great matches, a meaningful tournament. They've all qualified for the World Cup already, so you just want to see the best play the best.
My other suggestion would be a Pacific Islands Cup.
Yeah.
Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, PNG.
Yeah. New Zealand are saying that they intend to play at least 4 test matches this year, which would be good. And that what they want is a home and away series against Australia. And then we'll see. There is talk that they might come and tour England at the end of the year as well. If that happens, that's good for England's perspective. That would be a proper international series to do this year. At the moment, England's only announced match is a mid-season match against France. It's great for France, but not so much for England.
Would England want to play that at Wembley, or would they try a Northern Stadium, which to me would make more sense?
I think they'd probably play, say, if it was a 3-test series like the old days, I think they'd probably play all 3 up north. Or maybe they'd take 1 to London, but to a smaller stadium than Wembley. Arsenal or Tottenham, for example, both hosted rugby league matches recently. I was at Arsenal for the World Cup semi-final, and I was at Tottenham for the Challenge Cup final. Both of those stadiums, I think, are great options for rugby league in London. If it's a big international match like that, they're big enough that you can get a nice big crowd in. But if you've got 43,000 in the Arsenal stadium, that's pretty good. If you've got 43,000 in the 90,000 seats of Wembley, it's a bit cavernous, and it's not great, I think. And I don't think you can. I think 40,000 is the best you're going to get for a London match.
Mind you, I love the atmosphere that we had for that Australian-New Zealand game at Loftus Road.
Yeah, going for a smaller stadium,
20,000.
Yeah, I think it was 23, something like that. Yeah, going for a small stadium like that might be a good option, especially if it's New Zealand coming over. I think if it's England, Australia, you've got a little bit more history in rugby league there, and you probably can add a few extra thousand on. But I mean, you and I have been to loads of matches involving them. Remember donkeys years ago, we 98, we went to see Great Britain against New Zealand at Watford. There were 11,000 in, and that was basically like half capacity. I think it would draw more these days, especially just following a World Cup. But still, you've got to be realistic. Wembley's not really an option, I don't think. I think the smart play is to play at least 2 tests up north.
I've maintained that the rugby league needs to get serious about its internationals for many years now, and it doesn't. It seems to envy rugby union's international scene without actually wanting to do anything about emulating it.
Yeah, definitely. I think Steve Mascord, the Australian journalist, had a great suggestion a few years ago, which fell on deaf ears and went nowhere. But he said, at the moment, when Origin takes place in Australia, they play Origin midweek, and there's therefore those players are pulling double duty with club games in between, and it's a real hard flog on the body. He was saying, why not go back to playing Origin on 3 Saturdays and stop the club season for those 3 weeks, and then England can get their full squad, including their players who play in Australia, and New Zealand can get their team, and the Islanders can get their team, and you can have a full international program with all the other countries while Australia gets on with Origin. New Zealand could come and tour England in the middle of the season and play 3 tests against a full England team here. Tonga and Samoa could duke it out. I think that would be a great idea. Then we'd have 2 international windows. We'd have a mid-season one, and we could still do end-of-season internationals.
Yeah, you could have a little tour of the islands, which I'm sure, apart from if I was a rugby league player, I'd love a tour of the Pacific Islands in the middle of the season.
Yeah, we could send England down under, and they could go spend 3 weeks and do Samoa, Tonga, and New Zealand.
Yeah.
Or Fiji, and who knows? And those teams, as I say, could be playing each other, and all the while Australia's getting on with the biggest games in their calendar, Queensland and New South Wales.
Because it won't impact the audience for the state origin games, because the people who are going to watch the state of origin games are going to watch the state of origin games.
Yeah, and all you have to do is time your kickoffs right, and people could be in the stadium at Suncorp in Brisbane or something to watch Queensland and New Zealand, then head out, go to the bars after the game, and they've got England versus New Zealand on the telly afterwards. I think that would work. And also, one of the things Origin does is, because the club season is ongoing, as I say, and the Origin matches are taking place midweek, the attendances for the club season during that 3-week period drop right down, because people are all focused on Origin, and that's the games they want to go and see.
I would have thought midweek Origin series is cutting down the potential of people who have to come from work to get there.
Yeah, and it's adding the chance of players getting injured, I think, by adding matches on. I'd say, yeah, I agree with Steve Mascord. Let's break. Let's have a break in the middle of the season. Make sure that England's mid-season break is scheduled for the same time, and have a little festival of international rugby league alongside Origin. And in Australia, Origin can and would remain the showpiece. That would be the big highlight. But everybody else would be getting quality matches.
And if they do decide to bar the Islanders from playing in the Origin games, they've got some games to play in at the same time.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see how many of those Islanders would say, you know what, I'd rather still play for Samoa than play Origin. Especially if, as you say, they have a genuine alternative of games to play in. So we shall see. As I said, I'm not sure it'll happen. I think that common sense will prevail, and the eligibility rules will remain as they are, so that players can go on playing for Samoa and Queensland. Well, whatever. I don't feel like there's a huge array of fans in Australia saying it's not proper Origin if they're not committed to Australia. I don't think that exists. So I'm not sure what the impetus behind it is, but who knows?
Yep.
as I say, for England at the moment, all we've got to look forward to at the moment is a match against France, which will be fine and is obviously a wonderful test for France. But England need high quality opposition as well if we're to genuinely compete with those Southern Hemisphere teams. And as you said, Lebanon need games. And they can't find those games around themselves. There is a Middle East Africa qualifying tournament for the World Cup, but Lebanon can't play the likes of Morocco because they'll steamroller them. They're in the same position as England are over here, so they could be playing usefully be playing matches against the likes of Fiji or Samoa, which would be really good matches.
Given that the Lebanese players are going to have some Australian expats in there,
yeah,
they're going to have the same issues as the Islanders concerning the state of origin. Would any of them make the state of origin?
I'm not sure that at the moment that they have any players who'd be quite in the origin setup, but yeah, theoretically that could happen. And England's Victor Radley, of course, turned his back on Origin to play for England in this World Cup because there is no exemption for England. It is a case of if you declare your allegiance to England, you can't play Origin. Whereas if at the moment, if it's Tonga, you could. I'm not sure where Lebanon fall on that actually, but I think it's because England are a tier 1 nation. And officially, although realistically Samoa and Tonga should be tier 1 nations, they're not at the moment. They're still officially tier 2. Part of that is down to the level of club competition in their own countries, not currently being ranked high enough to justify them a tier 1 standing. So I think, yeah, for Lebanon at the moment, yeah, it would be all right actually because they're not a tier 1 nation. But I think, Victor Radley, as I say, he turned his back on Origin and he had a genuine shout at it. In fact, I think I would happily say he would definitely have played Origin if he hadn't opted to represent the country of his father instead. Speaking of Victor Radley, fallout from the World Cup, there's an ongoing investigation into an incident between him and one of Leeds Rhinos players, James Bentley, who played for Ireland in the World Cup, where after England's disappointment, Bentley apparently caught up with England at their hotel and had a go at England coach Sean Wayne, probably along the lines of "You should have picked me. I would have done better than that useless lot you've just got you knocked out." There was a scuffle, and apparently Radley nutted Bentley, and now there's an investigation ongoing. And since Radley has a little bit of form, worries about how potential suspensions and things like that could get into his season. But I suspect the investigation is not going to go anywhere other than, two guys got into it with each other, and it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other.
But speaking of investigations, there's some strange news out of South Africa, which is requiring police intervention, it would appear, where former Springbok international played in the last World Cup for the 16 caps, Sibu Nkosi, has gone missing. He has not been seen for the last 3 weeks. His club have sent people to his house, not there, and they're having to refer it to the police. So strange things in South Africa.
I mean, that's a real worry, isn't it? And let's hope he's all right first and foremost. I think to use the cliche, this is one of those periods where you say there's some things that are bigger than sport and so on, but it's true. Yeah, let's hope he's all right, but it's a definite worry, and it puts me in mind of former Wigan and St Helens prop forward Bryn Hargreaves, who in January, living in West Virginia, he also went missing, and hasn't been found. So gone missing now for as I say, for months and months, and nobody knows what's happened. Again, I hope he's all right because he's had some mental health issues in the past. So let's hope that story will have a happy ending. But after this length of time, you've got to wonder.
Yeah. And still sad, but more positive news as well. I think there has been a couple of developments in regards to stories relating to people with motor neuron disease in a more positive light, I guess. I see Rob Burrow will be reading bedtime stories as the first non-verbal person to do so.
Yeah, and Rob definitely inspires all of us. I think it's a horrible disease, obviously, motor neuron disease, and of course, just recently it took the life of Doddie Weir, great player, of course, who we well remember tearing it up on the field, and who was an inspirational and tireless campaigner for motor neuron disease himself, and who was a great comfort and inspiration to Rob when he was diagnosed. I know they spent a lot of time together, and Doddie was able to, just to sort of show him that there was a path to do something. The other thing, of course, Evan Sinfield, who's just been raising so much money for motor neuron disease because on behalf of his best friend and teammate Rob Burrow. The money that he's raised now is literally well into the millions. It's insane. He did 7 ultra marathons in 7 days, just before the World Cup final, and of course was there at the World Cup final to receive the justified plaudits from the crowd and to catch up with Rob. The Leeds fans always used to call Kevin Sinfield Sir Kev, but I think at this stage it's getting to the point where every fan of every club would love to see Sir Kev become a reality for what he's doing at the moment. So yeah, 3 inspirational men: Kevin Sinfield, Rob Burrow, Doddie Weir, and yeah, it's great to see that Doddie and Rob, in the face of such adversity, just have both done their best to play a bad hand and to look after other people.
Yeah, it's been a selfless approach from both.
Yeah, exactly. So, on that note, as I say, we remember Doddie Weir fondly, and our best wishes go to his friends and family. Let's perhaps turn aside from that somewhat sad news. It's nearly time for us to wrap up, so let's have a look at a great try.
Yeah, a great try and a great tackle.
Exactly. We always like to have a hit from the jukebox, but in this case, it's not so much a big hit that we're looking at as just a picture perfect tackle from one of the great tacklers, Gary Connolly. This is Sid Domick going through against Leeds Rhinos in 2005.
Got the angle.
And he never even saw Connolly coming.
He was just about to celebrate.
Yeah.
No way I'm getting, what was that? And
it's perfect timing, isn't it? He's caught him absolutely
perfect
spot
timing,
on.
flawless technique as well.
Exactly. Flawless technique. Caught him round the ankles, dragged him out, and that ball hits the ground just shy of the try line. And Sid Domick was a fine player in his day, and he had, of course, a man on his inside who he ignored, thinking he was a cert for that try. And as I say, Connolly came out of nowhere and just said, no, not today, pal.
Denied.
Gary Connolly, of course, was one of the great tacklers, as I say, absolutely outstanding. Um, uh, Played rugby union briefly for Harlequins, of course, back in '96 in that first.
Brief stint with Bath as well.
Yeah, exactly. I remember Will Carling, who was a fine tackler himself, spoke very highly of playing alongside him at Harlequins. That's a hell of a centre pairing, wasn't it? Carling and Connolly.
Yeah. Gary Connolly, very much one of the players I thought, had he gone in time, would have made a great impact in Union. But like Andy Farrell, perhaps a bit too late.
Yeah, I think so. I think Gary Connolly, he went over to rugby union, but he only did it for a few months and then went back to rugby league. And it was at that point when there was still, rugby union had just gone professional, and there was still, it was theoretically possible to play both in the year. So I think, like a number of rugby league players, he would just say, "I'll just go down there, get paid a bit in my off season, and see what it's like." And he did well. But as you say, if he'd been made the switch permanent to rugby union, I think he would have been absolutely outstanding. Because he was not just a great defensive centre, of course, he was also a fine attacking player. I think he would have been a certainty to be in the England side at that point. Though, of course, that might have put England in a very difficult position of saying, Carling, Guscott, Connolly, 3 into 2 doesn't go. Who do we drop? For me, you drop Carling in that situation.
I think so. The only thing that might save him was his captaincy, but Connolly was Connolly a captain?
No, Connolly was a very quiet player on the pitch, actually. So he would have been a lead by example player rather than someone who'd actually necessarily motivate the team around him. Whereas Carling was a proper captain, wasn't he? He was a captain's captain. But Guscott, you couldn't leave Guscott out. His acceleration was something to behold.
A man for him, the word mercurial was invented, I think.
Yeah. So I think, and I think the great combination of Guscott and Carling was that Guscott could slice through every gap, and Carling could put a big hit on an opposing centre. And you think, well, Connolly would have been able to do that too. So, but yeah, great stuff.
Speaking of union, league to union converts, that would appear to be Billy Wiz.
It is indeed Jason Robinson. This is the World Cup semi-final 2003, England against Wales, on their way to England's greatest moment in rugby union. And take a look. Here's Will Greenwood talking about.
Some players just look fast. Others are effortless, but
Yeah,
Robinson always looked fast to me.
He beats them so easily, doesn't he, Jason Robinson, that it almost looks too easy. And you think, it's just slack defence. But it's not slack defence. It's just he's completely caught them off guard. And like Jerry Guscott, he had that ability to be more or less standing still and suddenly to be at his top speed before you even noticed.
Yeah, the acceleration over the first 15, 20 meters just left people for dead. I know Guscott's top speed wasn't much to write home about, but it was that change of pace that would leave people cold.
Exactly. And the same goes, Robinson was obviously a quick player, but he wasn't the elite speedsters. I think when people often compare him because they played at the same time, him and Martin Afire, and off here, I should say, but got old habits die hard. But Martin was definitely quicker than Jason Robinson.
Yeah. More of your archetypal speedster.
Yeah. But Robinson, as I say, could just catch people off guard, and then it doesn't matter if they're quicker than him because they don't have time to chase him down because the start is that he's had on them is too much.
He's made them turn and then they're lost.
Yeah, For Will Greenwood, there wasn't a whole lot more to do. He received the ball and he pretty much just had to fall over the line.
Yeah.
He scored one of England's greatest World Cup tries, but we all know who the architect of it was. Robinson beat about 5 men to get that ball to Greenwood, but none of those men were actually anywhere near him at any point.
Untouched until the very end.
Yeah, and I'm sure as we look at our great tries, we'll look at Jason Robinson again in both codes.
He's going to be a repeat offender. I would like to see more of his stuff from his Wigan days.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple that leap to mind. Challenge Cup final against Leeds in 1995. He scored a couple of cracking tries. So I think that would be one we'd definitely look at. I think, Robinson was... When we talk about the great cross-code players, they don't come much greater than Jason Robinson, who really had established himself as, by the time he left rugby league, he was the best winger in Northern Hemisphere rugby league for certain.
Yeah.
And he was right up there with any Southern Hemisphere player. I'd say I remember him playing for Great Britain in 1997 against Australia in a Test series, and he was up against Wendell Saylor, who of course was one of the absolute great wingers himself. And they had a great battle, but Robinson scored tries in every match. So,
but yeah, I would suggest that for cross-code players, it's gonna be the only other player I could think of to put in the same bracket is going to be Jonathan Davis.
Definitely in the Northern Hemisphere, those are the two that leap out to me because they both got to the absolute pinnacle of both codes. When Jonathan Davis came to rugby league, he'd already established himself as one of the great talents of rugby union, and people were devastated to see him switch codes in Wales back in the late 80s when he did. I think there are some players in the Southern Hemisphere that you throw into the mix. Lottie Takiri, perhaps, as I say, the Fijian who went on to play for the Wallabies. Brad Thorne, who played for the Kangaroos in rugby league and for the All Blacks in rugby union. Sonny Bill Williams, of course, would have to be in any conversation. But yeah, Jason Robinson and Jonathan Davies were.
Speaking of the All Blacks, reminds me of what's probably the last dual sport international that we're going to see for a while in Justin Wilson, who was an All Black and a New Zealand international cricketer.
Yeah. As you said, I think in the men's game, certainly we won't see that very often. Of course, in women's rugby league at the moment, we've got Courtney Winfield Hill playing for Leeds Rhinos in England, and she's played international cricket for Australia before she came over to England and moved over here permanently and qualified to play for the England team on residency in the last World Cup. But yeah, not a lot of players will be dual sport internationals. That's the sort of thing you used to get 100 odd years ago. Players who play 3 or 4 games at a really high level and 2 of them internationally or something. But it's just too difficult.
Some sort of Russian prince or something.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, Jason Robinson. I know we've said before as well, if you're going to cross codes, wing is the position to do it. And we've seen a lot of top class wingers. Say Lottie Takiri as well leaps to mind. What's his name? Leslie Vainicolo. There's been quite a few of them, but Jason Robinson was a special talent.
Was Inga the winger? Was he a union league to union convert?
No, he was a union to league convert. Yeah.
All right.
He started out playing rugby union, became an All Black, playing on the wing, moved to Wigan, moved into the centre and went from Inga the winger to Twiggy in the middle. Some wags had it. Another cracking player. He was one of my absolute favourites in his Wigan days, I have to say, because he had everything. He was deceptively fast for such a big man. Really took some stopping.
It's effectively square, so really low centre of gravity.
Yeah, the amount of times I saw him score tries with two or three players trying to tackle him and failing, as he just sort of carried them over the line. But he also had a great step on him, and soft hands for passing. So he must have been an absolute nightmare to defend against. You think, even if I can tackle him, he might step me and go round me instead of. He could run over me, he could run past me, or he could just make the space and pass it to someone else who scores. And he had Jason Robinson outside him.
Again, nightmare combos.
Yeah, it's cruel and unusual, to be fair, isn't it?
Although, to be fair, that Wigan backline was quite cruel and unusual in total.
Yeah, at one point you had those two on the left wing, and you had Gary Connolly and Martin Fire on the other side.
And who was a fullback?
Henry Paul. So yeah, it's just nightmarish. I mean, that's as good a 3/4 line as you'll ever see. Connolly, Tuigamala, or Fire and Robinson, all more or less at or close to their peak.
Peak again, years. Add in Henry Paul, and who were your halfbacks? That's just nightmarish.
Yeah, it was Sean Edwards was playing in the halves at the time. And even the reserves at the time, you think, oh yeah, we can bring in Bobby Goulding, we can bring in Barry John Mather, who of course also was a successful League to Union convert. Went on to win the Six Nations with England. It was just an embarrassment of riches.
I'm trying to think of the fullback who took over from Henry Paul. I was also a bit good.
It was Chris Radlinski was next in line.
That's what I'm thinking of.
And of course, just before Henry Paul, you had Frano Botica.
Robo kicker.
Yeah, indeed. And another, of course, convert from Union to League. Oddly enough, Frano Botica made the move to Rugby League because he was struggling to nail down the fullback berth in the All Blacks because of John Gallagher.
He's going to be hard to shift.
John Gallagher also made the move to Rugby League at the same time. Went to play for Leeds, but didn't have as good a time of it as Botica. And Botica said the goal kicking came about purely because Wigan's team was so good. He was worried he wouldn't get in, and he needed something extra. So he worked really hard on the goal kicking to make himself undroppable, effectively. And it worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I think
we've expanded that subject a while, so
yeah, we'll have a look at more great cross-code players, I'm sure. It's always a favourite of ours, and have a bit more speculation on who could have made the moves, who would have been the best, and perhaps we'll have a look next time at Wigan's adventures in the Middlesex Sevens. Which was, probably the nearest we ever got to seeing cross codes on a more or less even playing field.
Yeah.
So that was a terrific occasion back in 1996. So, as I say, we had the all-star Wigan lineup, and they came to Twickenham and had a party.
Definitely enjoyed themselves.
Yeah, but also won over the crowd as well, who I think didn't know what to expect from them really, and ended the day having seen some absolutely corking tries, and thought, yeah, this was great. So that was great stuff. I think the other thing we'll have a look at perhaps is the history of rugby. Some people have been asking me about that, so we'll have a look at how the history of rugby really doesn't stand alone. It's the history of football, because of course rugby football was part of football, and this is a story that will start way back in the 14th and 15th century, and take it all the way up to modern times. So
I think this is where
I
it'll
think
become hideously apparent that we were both history students.
indeed, absolutely. So yeah, I think in the next episode we'll start our first look at the history of rugby, and we'll look at the very beginnings of football, and then take it on up to more modern times in subsequent episodes.
So homework for us, and we're not going to tell you if there's going to be a test or not.
No, absolutely. But if you have any questions, shove them in the chat. Like, subscribe, share, and let us know what you want to see, and we will deliver.
We will do the research.
Indeed. And in the meantime, have a good one, everyone. Christmas is coming, but we will be back before that.
Yes,
and will we be debating a new coach for England? Who knows? I suspect we'll find out very soon, though.
Yes, indeed. Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks
everyone.
a lot. Yeah, and as I say, we'll be back round about the 15th.